Hello, Facebook. I've been wanting to do an update on my and my family's experience with mold exposure since my last ER visit, which was on last Saturday, November 16th. I had went to my physiotherapist at a Step Ahead Physiotherapy, and she said, "Nicole, you don't look very well." And I had been in the ER about a week before that. I went to the GP clinic, had a very poor experience with the general practitioner that was on staff that night. And that led me back to not getting adequate treatment. And so on Saturday last week, I went to physiotherapy, and Jen LaBelle, my physiotherapist, is like, "Nicole, you don't look good." And she had the pulse oximetry, the little thing you put on your finger to measure your pulse ox. She had a blood pressure cuff. She was able to see that I was tachycardic, meaning that my heart rate was above 100 beats per minute. My pulse oximetry, you should be like 99 to 100% on room air. I was getting down to like 94, 95% on room air. And so she said that I didn't sound very good in my chest either. So she had a stethoscope on her. So I came home really quick, got Tim and the kids. Jack had a Christmas tree lighting for the Cayman Youth Choir that I was really looking forward to going to. But breathing issues are scary, and airway issues are one of the most important things as when you become a doctor to be aware of. So we went back to the ER. The last ER experience I had before that, I sat in the waiting room for 5 hours before going back, despite having a tightness in my chest feeling. And when I got back there, they did a nebulizer, and that was it. So it was really frustrating between that ER visit and then the experience at the GP clinic. I was really not looking forward to going back into the ER. And I actually prayed on the way there that I would get a good physician who would listen and who would do a thorough workup. And so I went in and I brought a letter from my physiotherapist, and I shared that upon going in, and I was taken back quickly, and I was seen by Dr. Wedderburn. And I had a much different experience that time. As a doctor and as a patient, I have had to fight extremely hard as my own advocate since going through a near-fatal accident on December 15th, 2010. And I continue to fight hard as my own advocate and for my family, because the mold-filled residence that we lived in from August 1st of 2017 to August 3rd of 2019, it had detrimental effects on the four of us. So when I saw Dr. Wedderburn on Saturday, the 16th, last Saturday, I shared everything with him, and I shared that I've done extensive research, and the big difference was that he listened. In our clinical skills, our doctor-patient relationship classes, some of the things that they taught us that I had seen in different experiences were, one, to listen to the patient. So often your doctor will interrupt the patient, and we were taught in medical school that if you listen to the patient, they will tell you what is wrong, and I agree with that. Another thing that we were taught was to not interrupt the patient and, for example, put your hand on the doorknob, which is nonverbal communication of, "I'm pretty much done with this conversation," which is what I experienced in the ER visit prior to the one on last Saturday. Another experience, another thing that we were taught, I'll move on from there for right now. But anyway, so Dr. Wedderburn, he listened to me. And in listening to me, he did additional research as well. He did thorough testing. My O2 sat was low in the ER. My heart rate was above 100 beats per minute, tachycardia. And every experience that I've had, I've been in the ER more times this past year than in my entire life. And going back now, having the knowledge that the landlord knew that there was a mold issue before we even moved in, and she failed to tell us, everything fits together, which is frustrating and it's sad. and it's maddening, but now it's let's get to more answers, restoration of health, accountability, and justice. That's where I'm at with all of this. So when I left the ER, I had now 5 medicines, but one of the most important ones that I got was Singular. So this is really important for somebody who has a mold allergy like I have in terms of counteracting that. Had the physicians listened to me, the 2 experiences prior, I could have had that sooner. It could have prevented me from going back into the ER and suffering longer. Dr. Wedderburn also got me in for a chest x-ray, which came back fine, which was good because mold exposure can cause cancer and death. He also got me into the respiratory therapist for pulmonary function testing, and I had that on Thursday. But before Thursday, on Tuesday, we went to the legal befrienders office, which is with the Cayman Islands, the Resource Center. And that was a very positive, helpful experience. We now have further guidance on who to contact to further pursue accountability and justice. On Wednesday, this was something that people have asked me or said to me that I had been struggling with because Jack and Caitlin have seen me in the ER. I've had some really scary experiences this year, and they've witnessed all of that. And Jack had made a comment to me. He was like, Mama, but why do you have to go through this? Because he has seen me struggling to breathe. And this is something that I had struggled with, and I talked to my therapist at Infinite Mind Care about, and I recommend seeking therapy. I've had therapy for 9 years now since my accident, and it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. Healing is hard, and when you're on an island and you don't have family here and you're pretty isolated being at home, it's helpful to have that supportive outlet, and I recommend it. There is no shame in seeking somebody to listen to you and to support and guide you. So I had shared with my therapist, I stated that, I struggled. I just got out of an 8-year battle with a long-term disability company that was settled in my favor, but it was at the level of the U.S. federal court. I've had investigators follow me. I've had to go to independent medical examiners, which is disgusting. I've seen greed in medicine. I've seen the good, bad, and ugly in medicine. And I was tired. The last thing I wanted to do was fight another battle. I don't want to be walking through this, but I have no choice in the matter. And what I've been convicted of is, I survived a near fatal accident by the grace of God. I don't have to be here. So many times I'm given sober reminders when I see accidents of relatively lesser degree and people don't survive. Every single time it hits me so deeply and it hurts, and I'm reminded of that. And then since my accident, I've prayed to be used by God. And the greatest realization is that I don't get to choose the way God decides to use me. And I don't know what He's going to do by allowing me to walk through this experience, advocating for me and my family. And it's a greater public health issue here on this island and in other places where you have water damage or humidity and you have people not maintaining property properly. The former landlord, she failed to fix the air conditioning. We were told that for years before we moved in. She was told that that needed to be replaced. There was mold in both of the bathrooms. I tried to kill it with every single thing that I could possibly research, and nothing would kill the mold in the bathrooms. And every time I cleaned that, those mold spores, and I have a mold allergy known since I was in my youth, that made my health worse. And then there was a minor renovation that was done in the home when we lived there towards the end of our tenancy. I think it was May of 2019. And there was a large portion of black mold that was spotted. And the gentleman that came to do that renovation, they cut out a big portion, but I found more after. And what I have come to learn in my research is that you should not be present when that is cut out, because what happens is this influx of mold spores in a high concentration in the air. So when you have somebody who's already sensitive to mold, and then you have people coming in to eliminate mold, either I should not have been present. That would have been the best choice, is to not have somebody who is allergic to mold be in the property when that mold is being removed, or I should have been covered. You should be covered. You shouldn't be breathing that in. And so, yeah, you don't get to choose how God uses you when you pray to be used. And this has been a very educational and very undesirable experience. I have done excessive research on mold exposure since this all took place. So then on Thursday, I had the pulmonary function testing done at Health Services Authority. And I presented my patient history, including the ER visits. I wrote a couple things down, including my ER visits, the mold exposure. I have no history of smoking. I have not drank alcohol in 7.5 years since the night I conceived my son. I am not obese. So with obesity, you can get a restrictive lung disease. I don't have scoliosis. That would be another cause of restrictive lung disease because it's compressing the lungs. And so the pulmonary function test, basically what it does, it looks to see if there's a restrictive or an obstructive type of lung disease. And so with the restrictive lung disease, your lungs are prevented from fully expanding with air, so that makes breathing difficult. It can worsen with time, and it could be reversible. So I shared some of the examples are obesity, scoliosis, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, sarcoidosis, which I did a report on in medical school, and neuromuscular disease like muscular dystrophy or ALS. Obstructive lung disease, you have a normal or an increased total lung capacities. And examples of that could be asthma. I had childhood asthma. I was exposed to cigarette smoke. And I also had allergy testing, and that's how I know from my youth that I am allergic to mold. And so had I been told upon moving into this prior residence that the place was infested with mold, there's no way I would have exposed myself and my children to that. At the end of our tenancy there, I had a positive tilt table test for dysautonomia, and my cardiologist agreed that the mold could trigger the dysautonomia. And I was extremely dizzy. I couldn't stand up long before I felt like I was going to pass out. I was faint feeling. When they did the tilt table test, this is a test of the autonomic nervous system. You can't fake it. They took me from a flat position to an upright position, and within 6 minutes, I was blacking out. My blood pressure dropped enough to be defined as late onset orthostatic hypotension. My blood pressure dropped, which was causing my symptoms. My dysautonomia symptoms have markedly improved since moving out of that mold-filled home. So that further confirms that that was the trigger. The other example of an obstructive lung disease is COPD, so chronic bronchitis or emphysema. And another example would be cystic fibrosis. So my pulmonary function testing came back good. So I don't have restrictive or obstructive lung disease. So what that leaves me with is inflammatory or allergic reactions to something that would trigger that, and that would affect my O2 saturation. So I did more research, and dysautonomia and vasoconstriction can cause the lower oxygen, O2 saturation. So it's all fitting together. Now, The next thing that I did was go to the Department of Environmental Health, and that was something that Dr. Wedderburn in the ER suggested that I do. And he gave me a stamped referral letter that I took there. And I talked to Antoinette in the lab, and she told me that any of our belongings, especially our mattress where the roof leak dripped on, in public health, the nurse said that the mold was probably throughout the whole entire ceiling and we couldn't see it. That was there before we moved in. Any of our belongings that moved over with us can still be exposing us to mold. And I have found a couple items. One looks like there's black mold in it. I have underwear from my little girl that has mold in it. And so we can continue to be exposed to mold even though we're no longer living in that mold-filled residence. And even worse, this is a nightmare of an experience, even worse, that mold can then can contaminate our current home. So thankfully, we have the most amazing landlords now. They're fully aware of our situation and they're fully supportive of everything that we're doing in order to move forward with this. And so the Department of Environmental Health, they were busy last week. They only test residential areas if you have a signed stamped referral letter from a physician, which I got. And that was a recommendation from the ER doctor, was to get our belongings tested because that can be continuing to contribute to breathing issues. And once I was given the Singular, which was given by the ER doctor that listened intently and patiently and with care, my breathing symptoms started to improve. So that is another piece of evidence that the mold is the reason for all of the continuous health issues. I also next week see the pulmonologist, and another test that she can order is a diffusion test, which looks at gas exchange at the cellular level. So we'll see what Dr. Archita at Health City does next week when I present all of this to her, because it's been 2 months since I saw her last. Island issues. So we will see what happens with that. So a couple other quick points, because I've talked to people have shared their experiences with me. Public health confirmed my suspicion that this is a bigger issue since Hurricane Ivan. So a couple things that I learned when talking to the respiratory therapist this week. I was told in the past that some people took insurance money after Hurricane Ivan and they didn't fix the property, they just took money and left. Another thing that I learned from the respiratory therapist this week was that some insurance companies didn't pay out, which is very similar to the experiences and why I had to take my long-term disability company to the U.S. federal court. And I found favor in that. Despite this billion-dollar industry paying people big money to try and discredit me, my honesty has continued to prevail, and battle after battle I have been victorious. Integrity will take you far in life. It has served me extremely well. So I found out that after Hurricane Ivan, some of the insurance companies, they didn't pay people. So here you are left with damage, and that sets you up for mold. Let's see here. And another thing that the respiratory therapist advised me was not to live in residence that went through Hurricane Ivan. We currently are in a property that went through Hurricane Ivan, but our landlord told us that they had to bust out walls. You could see from our downstairs bathroom to the living room TV, he said, and they cooked outside after Hurricane Ivan. And they were also patient in having contractors restore their property. He stated that some people had poor workmanship because they wanted to get it done quicker. And so being patient was a beneficial thing for them. And again, when I shared that we were going to have our belongings tested, our landlord was like, you make sure you have everything in here tested. And that's exactly what the Department of Environmental Health stated they would do. And our current landlords, they were going to put tile in our upstairs. and they wanted to have that done this week. And I had sent a message and I expressed my concerns because mold spores are airborne. So my concern in being respectful and caring to the property that we're renting, we treat it as our own, was that if they do tiling and there's mold spores in the air, then potentially those mold spores could get trapped behind new tiling and then be in our current landlord's walls. And I would feel horrible if that was the case. So we're doing what we can to help remedy the issue and to stop it in its tracks. So let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to share on this video. I'm going to download it and then share it at my page, Dr. Nicole M. Eastman, DO. But otherwise, this coming week, we have the environmental health that should be coming. I have a appointment with another professional who works in health care. And about a year ago, I was sharing my experiences, and she said to me, she's like, that sounds very similar to how I feel. Whenever I would leave the mold-filled residence and go outside, I would feel better. And then inside, I just felt horrible and fatigued and dizzy and no help from the ex-landlord. When I finally wrote her a message, it shared everything, she put a note on our door that said she wanted us out in 21 days. So this woman that I was talking to, I saw her again just recently, and she was like, okay, you've convinced me, because she saw me with my breathing issues. She's like, you've convinced me to talk to my landlord. She said, you know, she's been really nice. And I said, well, I'm just warning you, when you tell this person about mold, expect that they might not be so kind in response. And I found out yesterday that, in fact, her landlord did not respond kindly. And the response was, oh, you're just a slob. Now, this is a professional woman who takes care of other people. And I've seen their workspace. They're not a slob. So that is a response. Another individual that used to be neighbors with me back at Moon Bay, their entire property molded. And the landlord's response was, it's because you shut your closet doors, which is asinine. So what you see are landlords who are not maintaining properties, and then they're abusive to tenants when the tenants bring it to their attention. Another healthcare professional that I know, her friend had the place tested. It showed it was positive for mold. They told the landlord, and again, they were told, I want you out. So the likelihood of then what happens is they kick the tenant out, who has now learned about the mold. They do not fix the mold issue. They bring in another unsuspecting tenant, like us. The tenant has health issues, and it's this revolving cycle. So they don't fix things, they take rent money, and that is a public health issue. When we were told to get out of our last occupancy, within 6 weeks, we know for sure, my husband thinks within a week, but for certain, we know within 6 weeks, our ex-landlord had a new tenant in that property. And the speech therapist that my daughter saw, because she has enunciation issues, her nose ran the entire time we lived there, finally got to see in the back of her throat. I never even thought, I had so many of my own issues, I never even thought to look in the back of her throat, but the speech therapist was like, her adenoids and tonsils are likely the issue with her enunciation. And she had shared with me, she's like, there is no way that your ex-landlord remedied an extensive mold issue like that within 6 weeks. And I want to do everything within a legal perspective, but I think about the man that is the current tenant in that property. And I know what we went through. And another woman who had shared her mold experience back in the US, her and her son have had significant health issues. And again, an abusive landlord not taking it and just threatening to break the lease. And they're in a vulnerable financial position like we were when we were living back at our last place of residence. And that friend of mine was like, I don't know how anybody could do that to another human being. And sadly, it comes down to people thinking about themselves and money. And it's very disturbing. So this is my update on what has happened in the last week with my research and experiences with mold exposure. And so I'll give another update. I plan on doing another update in a week after I get more answers. So thanks for tuning in. If you have any comments, please feel free to share them. And I hope that this serves a good purpose.